life? Well, I want to start mentioning that people often think that the only ones who can make changes in the world are those in the governments, people with money and power. However, today we have Mr. John Yu to remind us that change can be made in a variety of ways. All we need, as it is said in this year's spin, is to dream it, plan it, and act on it. It is an honor to introduce Mr. John Yu, a man who has changed the way people look at environmental restoration through the art of filmmaking. Mr. Liu has focused on ecological cinematography since 1995 and has written, produced, and directed films on environmental subjects. One of the most important projects he has held is on the topic of restoration of highly damaged territories. In his film, Coping in Changing Climate, he recounts the story of how he went to the low plateau in China to document the changes being made by local people who are constructing a new landscape in a vast scale. Making these projects was what motivated him to become a soil scientist, because he learned that many of the tragedies that humanity faces due to nature can be inevitable. Furthermore, Mr. Liu has produced other films, including Jane Goodall's China Diary for National Geographic. Among other achievements, he helped open the CBS News Bureau in Beijing and worked there for 10 years. He has also worked as a photojournalist in private television, Diana, and German television. As Mr. Liu grew, he observed China as it emerged from isolation and poverty. It might have been exciting to see China stand up, but also terrifying to consider the pollution and environmental implications of its rise. Like many of us, he thought that someone should do something about it. But then he realized that his own attitude was part of the problem in the sense that he expected someone else to act upon it instead of doing it himself. If we are unwilling to change our lives, why would anyone else do it? Mr. Liu decided to create the Environmental Education Media Project for China and to devote his energies to understanding and communicating about the environment and ecology. With this project, he's distributed existing films and has made many others for China and the world. Again, we are proud to present our next keynote speaker, Mr. John Yu.
It's great to be here. I've actually spoken at the GEM conferences many times, and it's wonderful to see that more and more young people are getting concerned about these issues. And it's absolutely true. This is my email, by the way, if you need to get in touch with me. It's absolutely true that we can make a difference. But in order to do that, we really must act. And I would say that we don't really have a lot of time. You need to think about time in a number of different ways. So I'm 60 years old, but I can remember when I was your age. And actually, we have to think of time beyond our own lives. We have to think about the time of the earth, the time of our ancestors, and we have to think about the future. Now, I think some of you will have gone to church and heard about the cosmology of the Garden of Eden, human beings emerged in paradise. And others of you will have studied evolutionary theory. And sometimes there's a thinking or feeling that these two worldviews diverge. But as I've been studying now for about 18 years, I found that whether you look at the creation myth and human beings evolve or emerge in the Garden of Eden, or you look at evolution, in both cases, human beings begin in paradise. According to the scientific understanding, the Earth is about 4.567 billion years, something like this. But human beings have only been the dominant species for about the last some tens of thousands of years. So in both cases, human beings emerge in a perfect planet. But as you know from your studies, many things are changing. And when I started to study, I started first to study large degraded ecosystems. But then I really wanted to know, what is it like in a perfect system? And I found that there are three evolutionary trends which are completely critical to creating the Earth systems as we know it. The first one is that the Earth was totally colonized by biological life. So originally, the Earth was a molten rock surrounded by poisonous gases. But life totally colonized this. And the process that went on in this development is photosynthesis. And photosynthesis over prodigious time created the atmosphere. And it created the hydrological cycle. And it led to speciation and differentiation that led to infinite potential variety in genetics. So these are areas which need to be understood. This is hanging out of a helicopter in Mexico, in Chiapas. I highly recommend that. But these trends are continuous. They're continuous today. They are still active. Nothing has changed with natural evolutionary trends. And these trends are accumulative. That means that the biological life spreads everywhere on the Earth. The size of the biomass continuously grows. And as each generation of life dies and gives up its body, the organic matter in the soil increases. Now, if you go and study the cosmological ideas, then human beings sin, and they're cast out of paradise. And if you study the scientific implications of the rise of human beings over the last few tens of thousands of years, you find that these natural evolutionary trends have been interrupted. Now, I started to study this in the early 90s. This is high up in the Himalayan plateau in Shanghai. And this river was known as the Mother River. And it was known as the Mother River because all the different tribal groups formed surrounding this river. But one of these groups became the dominant ethnic group. This was the Han Chinese. And they could cook really well, So I think that's why their restaurants spread everywhere. So they became dominant because their cooking was so good. And this area is known as the Loess Plateau. And loess is a soil type. So in scientific terms, that's the geomorphology. So this soil type is created by the movements of glaciers high in the Himalayan mountains. And it's deposited by wind on the plateau below. It's a sediment. And the sediment is minerally extremely rich. Imagine those granites high in the Himalayas being pulverized. But it needs organic material in order to be fertile. These are enormous deposits, the largest loess deposits in the world. And this is also the cradle of Chinese civilization. So this is the center of the place where the Chinese began. So if you dig around in there, you might find some interesting artifacts. Now, while this place must have been incredibly beautiful. So this is in Sichuan to the southwest, and it's a fully functional forested system with hydrology and biodiversity, and it's nearly perfect. This is to the northeast in Mongolia. It's a fully functional grassland ecosystem. So there's a lot of evidence that it was in a mixed forest and grassland ecosystem that the Chinese race emerged. But as their civilization grew, they began to reduce the biodiversity, reduce the biomass, and reduce the accumulation of organic matter, interrupting those three trends. This is generally believed to be the second place on Earth where settled agriculture began, following Mesopotamia. But as this amazing civilization grew, where some of the most advanced art and science and culture developed, they destroyed their system.
When I first came to the Loess Plateau, I was astounded by the degree of poverty and degradation. And I wondered, how could the Chinese people, the largest ethnic group on the planet, and my fathers and my own ancestors, come from a place that was this barren?
So this place was virtually completely denuded of vegetation. And it's an area that must have been wonderful because it gave birth to the largest ethnic group on the planet. And actually there's literary references to rushing rivers and wild animals and giant forests. But eventually it turned into this. So over the period that I've been in China, I went to China in 1979, the Chinese have been emerging from poverty and isolation. And they were getting more and more wealthy on the East Coast. But in this place, it was just famous for poverty and for flooding and for drought and for famine. So the hydrological cycle had been completely disrupted. And so when it rained, the water didn't infiltrate into the ground and into the vegetation, and it wasn't respirated. It just started to erode away all of the fertility. And when it flowed away as runoff, it wasn't available for the rest of the year in agriculture. And this was enormous. Actually, it was so bad that 1,500 times in recorded history, they've had massive floods, including floods where millions of people have died. And this is also a weird phenomenon. This is the effect of 1.6 billion tons of sediments going into the river. And this this causes enormous dust storms, which fill the air and are actually contribute to climate change. So what we saw there was that over historical time, oh, he's come back. Welcome back. Over historical time, this place was destroyed. And it was destroyed by human impacts. So it wasn't an accident. It was understandable. So we know what they did. They cut the trees. They planted crops on steep slopes. And they free-ranged goats and sheep until everything was gone. So what's interesting about this is that every cradle of civilization has followed this same trajectory. And if you do this, there's a logical outcome. So you will reduce these natural trends, and you will suffer the consequences. And so what we're looking at when we look at human history is often people who thought they were doing something for themselves by growing crops or cutting trees or doing animal husbandry, but because their efforts were separated from what nature wanted, the outcome was negative. And this creates poverty, and this creates an unsustainable situation where the fertility in the ground, the different biodiversity around the area is lost, and massively the hydrological regulation is changed. And what this means is that nature has regulated the atmosphere, the weather, and the climate. So when we change these outcomes, we should expect climate changes because we've destroyed the natural regulatory processes. So it was about 10 to 12,000 years ago that human agriculture began. And it began in Mesopotamia, and it was second in China. This is actually Neolithic agriculture, which is going on today. So you can see this, and it's happening here also in South America. So you can see slash and burn agriculture. I've seen it in Bolivia, and in Peru, and in Brazil, and in Ecuador. So when you do this, as I started to study, I realized this artificially elevates the evaporation rates. This artificially elevates the temperature. This massively changes the ability to infiltrate and retain moisture. And every civilization that followed this trajectory ended up exactly the same way. And what I started to think about was, if we are studying history, why? Is it just interesting facts? Or are we supposed to learn something from this? Are we supposed to learn why they destroyed their sustainability and collapsed their civilizations? And if we are, then maybe there's another behavior that we could follow that would end up with a different outcome. And this brought us to the restoration of the Loess Plateau. So, in this period that China was rising in power and affluence, they weren't satisfied with having such a big degraded area. So they decided they were going to fix it. Now this was pretty much counterintuitive to enlist the local people. And not everybody wanted to do this. So this man's saying they want us to plant trees. But why? I'm worried about the future generation. They won't be able to eat trees. But actually, you can eat trees. And what they did was they enlisted the entire community. So they shifted the intention of the community from trying to make money to trying to restore ecological function. Their methodology was to restore vegetative cover on the tops, to make flat fields, which would be the same thing that Incas and earlier pre-Incan civilizations did here, and then to capture all the water in the landscape. So they were able to do this over a period of about, well, we've been studying it now 18 years, but by 9 to 10 years, we found that there was quite an extraordinary result. They also did something very interesting. They made an econometric evaluation. They determined that the ecological function was more valuable than the production. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. They also banned tree cutting, slope farming, and free ranging of goats and sheep.
When I first met Mr. Tom Fuyan and his colleagues back in 1995, I had no idea this initiative could achieve such dramatic results.
So this was a change between 1995 and 2009. We made this film for the Copenhagen COP15.
The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land.
So essentially what we've seen is that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems if you know what you're doing, and if you value the ecological function higher than the production and consumption of goods and services. So this changes infiltration and retention of rainfall. This alters respiration, microclimates below the canopy, and it naturally regulates the weather and the climate. So over the last few years, this has become pretty important because the climate's changing. And this is done by ordinary people. Now, there was a $500 million investment there, but in terms of per capita or over the area, the project area was 35,000 square kilometers. So this is not an expensive intervention in comparison to other things. There are a great many scientific implications. They are, as you probably know and you're thinking about all the time, is that there's carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere. And Al Gore's film and other communications have suggested that human impact on the climate is egregious emissions of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And this does have a major effect. But the fact is, all the carbon was taken from the atmosphere by photosynthesis. All the carbon in the fossil fuels, all the carbon in the biomass, all the carbon in the oceans, all the carbon in the soils. So time, photosynthesis is the driving factor. And what we've seen and measured and documented is that temperature, soil humidity, respiration, evaporation rates, they're all dynamic. We can affect them if we understand what they are and how they work. So this means that the problems that we're seeing around the world are not accidental. They're the logical outcomes for the types of things that we're doing. If you disrupt ecological function on a planetary scale, you will definitely have these impacts. And so we're seeing them. Now, there's some other important questions. And of course, the fact that we've learned that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems is also pretty important. So now the question is, if we can do this, why don't we do this? What is stopping? Why are we falling at those hurdles on the way to do what we're trying to do? And this has been something that I've been considering now for a long time. These outcomes are logical outcomes. And so there's also a reason why we are not doing the right thing, and that we continuously, over historical time, do the wrong thing. So, why are we doing this? What is it that drives us to destroy our environment? It's interesting, if you come to the workshop, I'll show you perhaps some gorillas. Gorillas foul their nest, so they can't sleep in the same place twice. It's disgusting.
The world is facing multiple problems. We have biodiversity loss, climate change, desertification, food insecurity, poverty, disparity, and now the threat of financial collapse. Seems like there are two conversations going on. One in the developed world, which is talking about economics and technical solutions, and another one in the developing world, which is talking about survival and sustainability. I've begun to see this differently. When it comes to survival and sustainability, there's only one story for the human species, and we're all in this together. All our problems are interrelated. Far from being mysterious, they're actually the logical outcomes of the type of economic system that we have created. And this also seems to point toward the solution. We know that we see a forest, a lake, the ocean, a natural river system, the atmosphere, that it's more valuable than computers, cars, or airplanes, which are valuable for a short time, but then become trash and pollution. Natural systems are renewable. They've evolved over billions of years, and they are infinitely valuable. Now, the global economy values production and consumption. And although few understand it, speculation. This has suggested the finite derivative shaped from the Earth's natural systems are somehow more valuable than the infinitely renewable systems themselves. This is simply wrong. We need to admit that we made this mistake. If we were to truly value natural systems, then nature would become the basis of our money and our economy. To protect nature, then, would not be a luxury, but a necessity. This brings us much closer to the truth, because we must have water, air, and fertile soils. But we just want computers, cars, and airplanes. We can change. It will not be easy, but we can and we must do it. I think there are two possibilities. If we are thoughtful and do the right thing, then we can consciously transition to a new paradigm in which human actions and the natural environment are in harmony. The other possibility is that the current system implodes from its own corruption and mistakes, and we're forced to try to salvage whatever we can of human civilization. For the sake of the children and future generations of life, we need to consciously decide to do the right thing. When we do that, we'll understand that wealth is coming from natural ecosystem function. And this will be the basis of our money. And all human actions will go to conserving and protecting and restoring ecological function on Earth. We need to shift societal intent away from the production and consumption and waste of the economic system as we see it now, and realize that wealth is coming from natural ecosystem function. If we run out of water, if we run out of fertile soils, if we run out of air, if we alter the climate, our money is worthless. We have to understand that the true wealth on the earth is coming from natural ecological function. And if we do this, if we choose this, then our money and our economy will reflect that. And all human activity will go toward conservation and, wherever the land is degraded, restoration. Because that's the way to protect wealth, and that's the way to increase wealth.
So that's what I think is happening. Something is fundamentally wrong. And then this fundamental mistake is repeated historically over a long period of time. And I think the last film, the student film that was shown where everyone needs to go together, this is exactly what we need to do. We need to go together. And I would say that this period is like other periods in human history. Another period in human history was a time when slavery was acceptable. So it was possible to go somewhere and take a person and take them to another continent and force them to work. And you could kill them, and they were your property. Well, this was wrong, but it went on for a long time. And now we have a situation where toxic landscapes are valued higher than river systems or rainforests. How could that be right? That can't possibly be right. And yet we think it's defensible. We're going to have a lot of trouble in the future because you either got to be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. Another case historically would be flat earth, round earth. So the church said that the earth is flat, and it persecuted scientists who tried to say that the earth is round. Well, after a certain amount of time, you couldn't keep this up because everybody knew that the earth is round. And I think what's going to happen is, now we say that money is coming from producing and consuming things. But actually, all the wealth on the earth is coming from functional ecosystems. That's just the fact. So if we continue to defend the idea that wealth is coming from production and consumption, we'll create more deserts, we'll alter the climate, we'll create toxic pollution. But if we value ecological function higher than production and consumption, we will have created the basis to have a sustainable society. So this must be considered. This is something that if you can find the flaw in this reasoning, then I welcome you at 3 o'clock back here to argue this with me. But if you can't, then I think what we need to do is realize that it's inevitable, that there are only two outcomes that are possible. One is that we'll have climate changes and toxicity and massive deserts and famine that will kill billions of people and destroy civilization as we know it. Or we will redefine what we believe is wealth in a system which is more fair, in which every human being's actions goes to making sure that the earth is functional. What we've been doing now is seeing that this is a paradigm shift. This is such a large change that it means everything will change. Education will change. If you think your purpose is to get a degree in order to get a job, in order to make more money than somebody else, then you're going to have to rethink this. Because if you're getting an elite education at this particular time in human history, then your task is to develop a sustainable way for society to move forward. Because there's a lot of evidence that the society as it exists now is not going to exist in the future. So we can end pollution and waste, but we can't do it if we say that the products which create the pollution and waste are worth more than the natural ecosystems on the earth. And what we've been doing now is designing a methodology to transition the earth to get to a new level. And we're thinking about how to do this and how to engage lots of people in this. And what we're considering is research, training, and innovation centers for ecological restoration. So already at the global scale, there's a recognition that almost 25% of the Earth's surface is destroyed, historically by human beings. Now, we could restore these areas. It's not easy. It takes a lot of people. It creates a lot of jobs, and you have to know how to do it. So we could engage our science. We could engage our technology, our management skills, and the vast numbers of people with no jobs to do this. And it's interesting, when you do this, it's not a hardship, because this is a better way of life than getting into traffic to go to a cubicle to work for some meaningless task simply to make money. You need to think about this, because while you're young now, it won't last very long. So we have a task for those who are alive today on earth. It is the great work of our time. It is to save the planet, save civilization. Because if we continue to build more unsustainable industries, to believe that we can help the economy by going shopping, then we're going to have a terrible outcome. We need to rehydrate areas of the planet which have lost their hydrological function. That's your scientific task. Took this to Ethiopia, where there have been massive famines in 1984. Millions of people died. We wanted to know whether it's possible to change outcomes in places like this. Just like in China, the landscapes were virtually barren over vast areas. And this had happened historically by Greeks, Romans, Nubians, and all the local populations. These gullies are evidence of the enormous power of runoff during the rainy season. Without vegetation cover on the hillsides, when the rains come, the water doesn't soak into the ground, but flows
famously for Ethiopian fans.
Exactly as we saw in China. It's possible to revegetate the degraded areas, and this rehydrates the area, and we've seen perennial stream flows returning in areas where the streams have gone dry.
How is it that it's possible for you to get the stream to flow throughout the year? It is because of the vegetation cover, which has been regenerated on this mountain. This water is maintained in the landscape because as soon as rain falls on the canopy on this vegetation, that rain infiltrates gradually into the ground, ending up with this steady flow of this river. Water is life. Without water, nobody can do anything. I'm amazed, as short as 5 years, 6 years, you get clean water like this, providing you work hard for restoring this degraded landscape.
We think research, training, and innovation centers for ecological restoration are a logical way forward to test these systems. We can bring scientific people to do constant monitoring. We can train local people in how to do these things. And we can innovate. We can look for ways to increase productivity even. So we definitely need food for everyone. We need sustainable production of different types of products. We want safe things, our soaps, our foods. They should not contain toxic chemicals. They shouldn't damage the landscapes. And we can, in these places, work on that. And everyone's work in these places would be meaningful. This is a technique for dune stabilization. It's one of the hardest things to do is to stop the movement of the sand. This is simply to insert straw into the sand. Any moisture that comes from rain or dew will follow the straw into the ground. The organic material will begin to decay. Seeds will blow up or birds will leave their droppings, and this will actually revegetate areas. This is labor intensive, but it is doable. You need to think about what is valuable. Do we need to stop the deserts? Do we need to revegetate the earth?
A biodynamic gardener or farmer is really feeding the soil with compost, with organic material. We give the manure, we give the compost to the soil, and there we feed the life in the soil, all the microorganisms, all the earthworms. And that means that they will see that the right nutrition is available for the plants, not only from the compost, but also from the soil. So this is a compost heap which we put up with that material for 2 months ago. And the first thing which happens is that it turns warm. And if they put up the material the right way, the right moisture, air, and so on, all those beings, they can find some. Here they are. Here there is no more. There's lots of organic material, and they have to do. So they are here. And after some time they will have done their work. And who knows, perhaps we go over there. The worms, other beetles and microorganisms have been eating all of it. And produced this wonderful soil. That's in a way the secret of organic material. It improves the soil. It's not only nutrition, it's also structure. And it keeps nutrition, it keeps the water and the air in the soil.
This is Yoda. His name is Rene Haller. He's a Swiss man. He takes completely run landscapes. These are the tailings from mining.
The most important thing is to, as fast as possible, get vegetation to grow. And that can be again done in very adverse areas.
You can do that.
What happens now, there's hardly a place in this forest down there which has no vegetation. There's grass, there's trees, everything. Before, it was 2,000 square kilometers of desert.
These are tree nurseries in China. When I showed them to Africans, they said, no, that's a forest. I said, no, this is simply the tree nursery. This is how you get 100% survival in transplanting trees. We've actually seen even larger transplantation of trees with 30-year-old trees with the entire root ball and rhizosphere intact. It creates an instant microclimate. This is in South Africa, where people are working together with local communities, science, the government, and students. The students are leading this effort. They're creating jobs. They have one of the best nursery systems. And they got millions in investment. And I think Christo Marais, no, Christo's not going to tell you. This is in Ethiopia, where they're training many, many field workers to lead the local communities in restoration. We've had very good results in Rwanda. Places like El Salvador have pledged to restore vast areas of their land. Now we have to make sure that these efforts succeed. So they're going to need people who are dedicated and capable to lead them. And we also have to realize, this is in Mexico, also an excellent reforestation program. And as we've seen, there are 2 billion hectares around the world. So there's plenty of room to restore. And if we do this, we know that we can sequester sufficient carbon to address our climate change problems. And if we value ecosystem function higher than production and consumption, in 50 and 100 and 200 years, we can have every forest and grassland and wetland and coastal region back. And now you have to consider what your task is. Is your task to get a degree, to get a job, to make money, to outcompete others? Or is your job to design a future that is fair and sustainable for everyone? Thanks a lot.